Salutations from space and aloha from Earth. This is Gemini Brett of More Than Astrology, here with a presentation of the astronomy of the tropical zodiac that most of us Western astrologers utilize to heal and feel and know and grow. Today is March 20th, 2018. I'm sitting in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the sun just struck this dash of the yearly clock that we tropical astrologers call Aries. And I'm creating this video in a sense, not just as an educational tool, but to help astrologers defend themselves against the attacks of astronomers and scientists who excited to debunk our craft, utilize this one thing to say that astrology can't be real, especially zodiacal astrology or tropical astrology, that the signs don't align to the constellations. So for example, today the sun just ingressed Aries, as we like to say, moved from Pisces to Aries, and yet the sun, let me see if I can bring up an image of this, I will. Here's today as seen from Seattle, and this is the sun. And the sun, if I take the planets away, this is the wonderful software Stellarium. You see this? This is the Aries point of the tropical zodiac. And we're going to look at why that's the Aries point, and this is the answer. But I'll bring the planets back, and you can see the sun is right there. And yet it's aligned not to the constellation of the Ram over here, the constellation the astronomers call Aries, and traditionally has been called that, but rather to the constellation of the fish right here. So the astronomers and scientific debunkers of astrology will say that, look, you're saying that you're Aries, but you're actually Pisces. But they're not understanding, and it's sad because this is just very, in a sense, basic astronomy, the mechanism of the tropical zodiac. They're not understanding that it's not about the constellations. Signs and constellations are very different things. And so I learned where I began my start with Daniel Gemario and Kaylin Castell at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School to refer to the signs as Aries, Taurus, Gemini, etc. And the constellations is the Ram, the Bull, the Twins, etc. to differentiate the two. Now there are different zodiacs. The tropical zodiac, many will say, is seasonal, and we'll get back to that. I will tell you that it's directional. There are sidereal zodiacs that begin not with an equinox point, as the tropical zodiac does, but rather with a star. And their signs are therefore more aligned to the constellations, but aren't also perfectly, because the 12 constellations of the zodiac do not divide the plane of Earth's and Sun's dance into 12 pretty slices of 30 degrees. Yeah, some of these constellations are gigantic and some are small. All right. So signs and constellations are different things. And I think this is also a very important transmission. Constellations are terrestrial. Sit with that for a second. Stars are celestial. The constellations are terrestrial. Yeah, if you're out orbiting Sirius or Aldebaran and you look towards the Orion Nebula, you are certainly not going to see it positioned within a group of stars that we might describe as a giant here in the earthly skies. Does that make sense? The constellations are terrestrial. I mean, we could say maybe they're of our entire solar system, right? But it's from this place in space that the stars align in these star groups in the way that we can see them. And, you know, the way that we group them is also somewhat arbitrary and has a lot of differences throughout time and culture, right? So I hope that makes sense. So even if we're talking about the constellations, we're really talking about the Earth. And this, to me, is important because when we look at tropical astrology and the very real astronomy of tropical astrology, It is Earth-based astronomy, all right? And it works with the primary and the secondary motions of our planet Earth. So we're going to have a look at those with some beautiful images created by the wonderful Anna Zaharia. Anna and I worked very hard together to work on this image and some others that we'll see today, and hopefully you'll see many of these in the future. This is kind of our logo here, Gemini Brett and Scorpiona. And I hope you'll see that logo as you do in the lower right corner of this illustration on many to come, because I'm very interested in taking these astronomy illustrations that help describe tropical astrology and kind of recreating them to also reveal some of the astrological mysteries. All right, so we're gonna break this thing down by starting here just with Earth. All right. And yeah, I was born in Boston, which is kind of centered here, but the reason why I've chosen this specific view of Earth is because at the moment of the equinox, which where I sit in this moment in Santa Fe, New Mexico, was around 10:15 a.m. It was solar noon, right around Aruba, and the equator below that in Brazil. So that was the place, and we're looking at that here on the globe, centered on that place. That's where the sun, just as it ingressed Aries, was overhead. All right. Really, I would love to show this to you with the globe spinning this whole time. Eventually, I think our skills will lend itself towards animation, so we can show this in an even more beautiful way. But the Earth does spin, doesn't it? And it brings us such hits as sunrise and sunset. In other words, day and night. Is this not the primary astrological experience? It's an amazing thing that in the astrological tradition, sect, which is day or night, were you born at day or were you night? It was like literally lost for like 1,000 years in the tradition, which is incredible to me. Yeah. So why do we have sunrise and sunset? Because the Earth spins, and it spins on this axis, the polar axis. I like to call it the spine of Gaia. And the axis of Earth runs from the center of Earth, which is where we measure astrology, through her terrestrial poles, through the North Pole and the South Pole, yeah? And then off to the North Celestial Pole and the South Celestial Pole in space. Which way are we looking here? Can you tell me? A bunch of dots on a black screen. Again, this is Stellarium software, astronomy software, which you can download for free at stellarium.org. It's an amazing thing. Does anyone know which way I'm looking? What if I do this? Fill in the constellations. Got it? Northern Hemispherians should know this one, the Big Dipper. An asterism part of Ursa Major, the Big Bear, because it points, the cup stars point to Polaris, North Star. Cassiopeia also opens in that way. And North Star is north. Why? Because in our day and age, this is a star that is very strongly aligned to the North Celestial Pole. Okay? So in other words, as Earth is spinning, and Earth spins west to east, we notice the heavens spinning east to west. In the northern sky, the northern hemisphere, we see the star Polaris half the time, because the other half about it's daytime, right? And we don't see any of the stars at all. But Polaris is at the center of the spin. It's where the spin axis is pointing to. It's the celestial pole. I can also draw a meridian line through Polaris, because a meridian line runs north-south from your local position on Earth. It will run through the poles of Earth. It will run also right through the zenith above your head, the nadir below your feet. And so here I'm looking south, and we see this motion from the east to the west. It's also spinning about a celestial pole. I'll bring that in here. That's the south celestial pole. But we don't see it in the northern hemisphere because it's below ground. just like the southern hemisphere doesn't see the north celestial pole or north star because it's below their ground, right? There's not a south star at this time like there is Polaris North Star. All right. So this is called the primary motion of Earth. And again, it is Earth's spin. And it brings to us our primary experience, which is day and night. The plane of Earth's spin is perpendicular to the axis. The axis is north-south. The plane runs through the east and the west. And it's the equator of Earth. Yeah? Square the spin axis. If we extend Earth's equator out towards infinity, we have a plane that we call the celestial equator. All right? So dig this for a second. If you're standing at the North Pole or the South Pole, can you see how the celestial equator is your horizon? If you're standing at the equator, can you see how the celestial equator goes directly overhead? There's a thing that I call the latitude principle, which is that the latitude where you are on Earth equals your altitude to North Star. All right, so maybe that's a northern hemispherian trip. I can say in the southern hemisphere, your latitude equals the altitude to the South Pole space. I like to call the South Celestial Pole since there's no star there right now. Altitude, 0 degrees at the horizon, 90 degrees just above. So in Santa Fe, where I am now, it's like 35 degrees, I think, up to the North Star, which is here. Yeah, more than a third of the way. I live in Seattle, 48 degrees latitude about, so the North Star is much higher in Seattle, okay? And therefore the celestial equator, because they're square like this, as the North Star comes up, the celestial equator goes down, all right? So the ultimate examples are at the pole, North Pole, North Star is directly over your head, and the whole thing spins like this, okay? At the equator, North Star, latitude principle, the altitude to North Star equals your latitude. What's the latitude of the equator? 0, yeah? North Star's right on the horizon, as is the South Pole space. The celestial poles are on the horizon, and the whole sky spins like a wheel. With the celestial equator, square the North Star, and square the South Pole space going directly overhead. Can you dig that? Either way, this is what we're talking about with the primary motion, and it's west to east motion. So as the Earth spins west to east, we notice the heavens rising in the east and resting in the west. Why does the sky rise in the east? Because the Earth is falling in that direction. Why does the sky set in the west? Because the Earth is climbing in that direction. It's a fun contemplation. This celestial equator is the plane of Earth's spin, the primary motion, the daily motion, the diurnal motion, 24 hours, right? And though it brings us such hits as sunrise and sunset, I'm fond of calling this the circle of matter. Why? Because it's all about Earth, matter. All right, celestial equator, primary motion, daily motion, circle of matter. Yeah. All right, so let's watch the sky spin again. We're in the northern hemisphere here. I'm pretty close to the equator. Looks like I can see the latitude and longitude down there in the bottom left of the screen. And we're just looking south, right? So I'm taking the ground away here, and we see the horizon, yeah, horizontal line, and the meridian, the north-south line, vertical line. Looking south, this is the celestial equator, which runs through the directions east and west. And what does this motion look like? Yeah, I mean, this is sunwise, we used to call it in the northern hemisphere. We've come to call this what? Clockwise. Can you see that there? I mean, it looks like this, right? And our charts work like this. They work like a clock. I mean, it's more like a 24-hour clock, right? And only at this time, equinox time, because we actually align this thing where we have 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night, right? Because seasonally we know that days get longer in the spring and they start getting shorter at summer solstice, right? But It's not until the fall and the winter time when the night is longer than the day, right? Why? Okay. So this primary motion brings us this clock, this 24 hours in a day. And we see it on the chart, and we see it at what's called the angles of the chart. Just in a quadrant house chart. I just call these angles this. The rise is the ascendant in the east. Though it's not due east, it could be north of east, it could be west of east. I'm Gemini rising, which rises well north of east. That's a trip for another time. The reach, yeah, we call that the midheaven, or the MC, the medium Kelly, okay? Middle of the heavens, where the sun finds its highest height for the day, where the moon finds its highest height for the day. In the northern hemisphere, I'm sitting in the northern hemisphere now, northern hemisphere above the Tropic of Cancer, the sun rises in the east as it does everywhere in the world, and it reaches in the south. Midday, local apparent solar noon, not noon on your clock, because we've had to adjust our clocks to do these time zone things because of telegraphs and trains and planes and whatnot. But when the sun souths and the shadow goes due north in the northern hemisphere, above the Tropic of Cancer, it is midday. It is exactly halfway between sunrise and sunset. Exactly halfway between moonrise and moonset. The moon will south in the northern hemisphere, or north in the southern hemisphere. Between the tropics, it can go both ways. Sirius, halfway between Sirius rise and Sirius set in the northern hemisphere, will south, okay? And southern hemisphere will north. We'll tune this into the movement of the sun, but understand this is happening for all of the planets, all of the zodiacal stars. Rise, reach, rest, and then root. The root at the Imunchali, below the ground, we call the IC, if you know astrology, the cusp of the fourth house in the quadrant wheel. For the northern hemisphere, that's the direction north. But it's not North Star, it's down below the ground, where everything roots halfway between resting and rising. So we call that midnight, right? Not clock midnight, but the middle of the night, halfway between sunset and sunrise, halfway between moonset and moonrise, okay? So the rise, the reach, the rest, and the roots. And when we look at this in the chart, instead of me putting directions here, because the directions are not the same, just as the seasons are not the same for the northern and the southern hemisphere, in a sense they are reversed. The ascendant remains east or east-ish, the descendant remains west or westish, but in the northern hemisphere, above the Tropic of Cancer, north of the Tropic of Cancer, the reach is due south, the rest underground is due north. In the southern hemisphere, south of the Tropic of Capricorn, the reach is due north, and the rest is due south. Underground, and between the tropics, it can go either way, which is an amazing thing. All right, the 4 R's, the rise, the reach, the rest, and the root. Ascendant, midheaven, descendant, IC. Got it? And we know what we're seeing here above the horizon, the 6th through the 12th houses. The sun rises in the 12th house. Above the horizon, the 7th through the 12th house. The sun rises in the 12th house on the left at the ascendant and sets into the 6th house at the rest, the descendant. You can see the arrows here on the outer ring, yeah, showing you that this motion, the primary motion, is what we've come to call clockwise on our chart wheels. Yeah. Rise, reach, rest, root. And so the intersections of the horizon and this outer circle, which is the zodiac, are the ascendant, where we rise, and the descendant, where we rest. Ascendant in the east, descendant in the west. Where the meridian the local north-south line that runs right through where you are and through the this terrestrial celestial poles above head, below the ground. That's called zenith and nadir. That's a meridian line. You can see that written here. And the meridian cuts the zodiac at the reach and at the rest. But below the horizon, obviously below the ground, these are the first through the 6th houses of our chart. Okay? All right. This is the direction of the sun's daily motion, rising in the east, resting in the west, culminating at the midheaven in between. Now, on a static wheel like this, unfortunately, it will look like the sun is moving from Aries to Pisces to Aquarius like that, like what we would think of as the backward order through the sign. And I actually want to show an animation to like bring us out of that potential confusion. So this is equinox time here in Santa Fe, where I currently sit. And you know, I'll go to tomorrow and we'll keep the sun in Aries, and I'm going to bring it to sunrise, and I'm just going to look at the sun, okay? Which this is the ascendant in the midheaven and the descendant in the IC, and northern hemisphere above the Tropic of Cancer, where Santa Fe surely is. This is the eastern horizon, due south, the western horizon, below ground, due north, okay? So here we get to sunrise. And just very importantly, I want to show you that the sun in Aries, it's not going to go then backwards through Pisces, Aquarius, or whatever. The signs also rise and reach and rest and root. And just look at the order of the signs on the rise here. Taurus, and then Gemini, and then it will be Cancer, and then it will be Leo, etc. You can look up at the midheaven, it's Pisces, and then it will be Aries. Let's speed up time a little bit. Then it will be Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, right? The natural order of the zodiac. So even in the primary motion, you can look at any of these angles and you're going to see them going through what we consider to be the natural order of the zodiac. Just understand that when you see images like this that say the primary motion, the sun's daily motion, it's not backwards through the signs or retrograde through the signs. Aries rises before Taurus, rises before Gemini, before Cancer, etc. Okay? Great. Well, again, this is why we have primary motion, because the Earth spins about this north-south axis, the daily primary diurnal motion, the spin of the Earth. Astronomy, let me call it by its new name, astrology, is mostly concerned with the secondary motion, however, and this is the yearly motion. So the sun, about 30 days at a time, will move west to east through the signs. From Aries, just moved in today, to Taurus, to Gemini, to Cancer, to Leo. So understand that the primary motion is what we would call clockwise, rise, reach, rest, root on the chart, where the secondary motion, the yearly motion, is what we call counterclockwise or anti-clockwise. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, moving through like this, you see? So the daily motion and the yearly motion. And if I had more skills and time, I would draw curvy, arrows, but you get the point here, I think. So why is there a yearly motion? The daily motion's because of this, the primary motion, the spin of Earth, with the plane being the celestial equator, the circle of matter, all right? Well, there's yearly motion on this plane. The yearly motion is Earth's orbit. The daily motion, rotation. The yearly motion, revolution, orbit. Got it? This is called the ecliptic plane. The Earth's spin axis of the day is tilted at an angle of about 23.5 degrees, really 23.44 degrees, in respect to Earth's orbit of the sun. My fist here is the sun. Let's make this sun, Earth spinning on its axis and orbiting the sun. And the Earth in its spin is tilted in 23.5 degrees, right? That gives us such hits as the seasons. This is called the ecliptic plane. It is the plane of Earth's orbit about the sun, right? So let's say this is the plane, here is the sun, and the Earth is doing this thing, okay? Well, if I extend this plane out towards infinity, I'm going to find my way to the constellations of the zodiac. So from Earth's point of view, the sun is always held by one of those star groups. Do we see it? No, the sun is too bright, but we can watch and learn to see the sun's dance through these 12 constellations of the zodiac, which are at the extension of the ecliptic plane, which I call the circle of spirit. Why? Because that's where the sun lives. Maybe we call it the circle of sun. Well, we call the daily motion, the celestial equator, the circle of Earth. But I prefer these terms, matter for Earth and spirit for sun. Which, you know, I'm not trying to convince the rationalist scientists here. I'm trying to help astrologers tune into the astronomy. So when you're attacked by ideas like, well, your constellations are off and whatever, we understand that the tropical zodiac is really not a constellational thing. It's an Earth astrology or Earth astronomy thing. And even if it were, as I said before, constellations are terrestrial anyway. All right, so why the circle of spirit? Because this is the plane where the sun plays. And sun, spirit, we draw that circumpunct, the circle of spirit around this dot of source perhaps inside, okay? Why is the sun moving through the zodiac? Because the Earth is, right? And so as Earth orbits the sun, you know, right now, if my fist is Earth and this is the sun, Earth is in the constellation Gemini Brett. And now Earth is in the constellation, well, let me say, sorry, sun is in the constellation Gemini Brett from Earth's point of view. And now sun is in the constellation you. It's a really fun exercise. A couple of things you can do. One, put a lamp in the middle of the room, put your arms out to your side, and just spin slowly. For the northern hemispherians, spin counterclockwise slowly. And as you face the light, that's noon. And as your right hand gets there, that's sunset. And as your back is to the light, that's midnight. And as your left hand finds the way as you're spinning to the light, that's sunrise. I like in that sense to put left hand up and right hand down so I can see where I'm rising and resting. In between rise, reach, rest, root, okay? If you're in the southern hemisphere, you're gonna wanna spin clockwise and your right hand is up and your left hand is down and the right hand rises and then your chest is the reach and your left hand is the rest, right? Why would we spin different directions? The Earth is spinning the same direction, but you know, one person's standing this way and the other person's standing that way. Play with this in your mind a little bit and you'll see. Another wonderful exercise, put a sun in the middle of the room and walk in circles around it. You don't have to spin, really you would spin 365.242 times. Those are the days as you make one circle, one orbit of the sun. But for this exercise, just look at the light and move left to right, okay? For all of us. And you can put some symbols for the 12 signs in a circle around the circumference of your orbit or the room. And as you're walking, you'll see the sun move from Aries, which you want to the right of Taurus. You'll see the sun moving from Aries to Taurus, then to Gemini, and like that. It's a really wonderful thing to take embodiment exercises, become the earth as you spin, become the earth as you orbit, and see the primary motion from the former, the spin, rise, reach, rest, and root, and then see the secondary motion, the orbital motion, the zodiacal motion, the yearly motion as you orbit the light in the center of the room. Got it? Earth astrology yogas. All right, so the circle of matter, spin, primary motion, day. Circle of spirit, orbit. Secondary motion, year. Which is a result of Earth orbiting the sun. But from Earth's point of view, we see the sun moving through the 12 constellations of the zodiac and also through the 12 signs. Signs and constellations are different things. So daily motion, circle of matter, yearly motion, circle of spirit. The two intersect at the equinox points, which in the tropical zodiac are 0 Aries and 0 Libra. This is an entirely astronomical mechanism. It is very real. Astrology is not simply a symbolic language, which is a beautiful thing, and that is true. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. And this, for the tropical zodiac, is its device. Equinox, equal day, equal light. This is a time where the shadow of Earth runs north-south or south-north through the terrestrial poles. And therefore, all of Earth, as it's spinning, is experiencing 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night. There's a little bit of difference depending on location because the sun is not a dot, it has some body, and we're not going there right now. All right? But I do want you, if you can, to look at this image now and imagine the Earth spinning west to east, which where we're looking from is from the left to the right, okay? So you're gonna see New York there, end up getting to the right of our vision or view of the globe, and that will be what? That will be for New York, that will be sunset. Right now it's the reach, it's midday right over this place in Brazil. And that was happening in the moment of equinox today, March 20th, 2018. Yeah. Where I'm sitting currently in Santa Fe, New Mexico is 10:15 a.m. So you can see here, Santa Fe's got to spin a little bit from the left to the right, from the west to the east until the sun souths, midday. Then it will happen for San Diego, and later for Hawaii, and later for Japan and Australia. Get it, right? As the world spins, these are the days of our life, the primary motion on the circle of matter. Well, equinox time, in the tropical zodiac, the sun's movement into either 0 Aries or 0 Libra, as we begin on one hemisphere, fall, and one hemisphere, spring. Either way, right? Balance, equality. This is the time, and the only two times when the sun is at the place where the circles of matter and the circles of spirit embrace. See? Or if we want to speak more technically, the intersections of the celestial equator, the plane of Earth's primary motion, with the ecliptic plane, the plane of Earth's secondary motion, intersect at the equinox point. Wasn't grammatically correct, but I had that weird voice going, so good enough. Got it? Now check this out. If you're looking from Newfoundland, Canada, up here, north of the equator, which direction do you have to face to see the sun at midday? south, right? So the sun reaches for the northern hemisphere in the southern sky. Well, think about being down in Peru or Argentina. Which way do you have to face to see the sun? You have to face north. So the sun is at its reach in the northern sky. The earth is spinning the same way, west to east, and therefore all of the earth witnesses the heavens rising in the east, resting in the west, but we will see the heavens reach, and the sun is included in that heavenly crew, reaching for the northern hemisphere in the south and for the southern hemisphere in the north. All right? Things get a little different between the tropics, which are certainly northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere, but we're going to allow the sun to move in a sense, or we won't. I'll just show these points, okay? So the equinox points are where celestial equator and ecliptic intersect, where they are at their greatest divergence, and we can see this angle here, 23.5 degrees, which equals what? The tilt angle of Earth's spin motion, the primary motion, in respect to Earth's orbital motion, the secondary motion. So the greatest divergence between celestial equator and ecliptic, or as I like to say, circle of matter and circle of spirit, is 23.44 degrees. 23.4 from the vertical, which is 66.6 from the horizontal. Anyway, 23.5 has a lot of mystery to it as well. It's part of the Fibonacci sequence, and we could go on and on and on. And this is meant to change very slightly over long periods of time. It's not the precessional cycle, it's a different cycle, and it's also a story for another time, okay? But at the greatest divergence of ecliptic and celestial equator, these are the tropicos, the turnarounds, the solstice points. Solstice meaning the sun stops, and we're gonna go there another time as well. But this is the 2 points for which our tropical zodiac is named in Greek: tropikos, turnaround, solstices. So in the tropical zodiac, 0 degrees Cancer is where the ecliptic is at the highest northern declination, it's called, or distance from the celestial equator, where the ecliptic in the northern way most separates from the celestial equator, and the 0 Capricorn point where the ecliptic separates or has greatest declination from the celestial equator towards southern latitudes. Got it? So the equinox points, you know, and we call this astrological New Year now. It used to just be called New Year. Again, if you begin in March, that makes September 7, which is what Sep means, and October 8, which is what Oct means, etc. All right. But we begin in so many senses this tropical zodiac, these equinox points where spirit and matter embrace. And a quarter of a year later, they will most diverge to bring us these amazing experiences, right? June solstice, northern hemisphere, 0 Cancer, the longest day, southern hemisphere, the longest night, right? So how can our tropical zodiac be a seasonal thing if we're going to use the same signs for the northern and southern hemispheres alike? There are reasons. One thing I'll tell you just really quickly, you could research the apex of the sun's way. The sun, and therefore the entire solar system, which means you, is moving towards the direction we call north. And that's definitely a trip for another time. But it's one of the reasons why the tropical zodiac works in both hemispheres. More importantly, our tropical zodiac is not a function of the seasons. It is a function of the same thing that the seasons are a function of, and that thing is called the directions. Shamanism 101 all over the globe, the cardinal directions, which are actually a result of Earth's primary motion, or the spin motion. Our zodiac is a directional zodiac. The tropical zodiac is a directional zodiac. Tuning into the essence of the directions where you are, is an incredible way to connect to the proofs of the astrological equations we use. So this very true astronomy, this mechanism of the tropical zodiac, has these very clear 4 astronomical stations. Now, why there are 12 signs, that's also a tale for another time. We can say 12 months a year because there's 12 new moons a year. Actually, there's 12.37 lunations a year. We could say these 12 constellations. I will say that came after. And for me, it's been quest through the quadrivium sciences of sacred geometry, which is number in space, and musical harmony, which is number in time, that helps me understand that creation creates in 12s, and that's why. I will also say that our zodiacal signs do not come to the earth from the constellations. In fact, constellations, as I mentioned earlier, while stars are celestial, constellations themselves are terrestrial. I will say that the 12 signs of the tropical zodiac emanate from the heart of Gaia, the center of our planet, outwards along the celestial equator. Sorry, no, that's matter. Outwards along the ecliptic plane, spirit, towards infinity. Okay? Now I could kind of complete this 12-paneled plane into a sphere, like a 12-paneled beach ball, and we get a good idea of what the zodiac also is, and why, like, the North Star, even though it's way up at the top of the screen, is also in one of the signs. And we're not going there any further today either. I will say this. Imagine, I'm going to come back here. Oops, I'm going to come back here. All right, so we'll take the signs out of it. Just imagine if the sun is up at the Cancer point, the June solstice point on the right, where ecliptic is most northern declination from celestial equator. Okay, this is something that I got to kind of get back to the drawing boards, and not necessarily. Do you see on the globe itself, you see the blue horizontal ring? That's the equator, which projects out to the celestial equator. That's the plane of Earth's spin, the primary motion. Do you see the golden circle? That is the ecliptic plane. Now imagine if the sun was up on the right at the solstice point. Okay? If you're standing, now imagine that the Earth spins a little bit, so this will make sense. So right there, if the sun is up at the solstice point on the right, at Newfoundland or New York, it's about sunrise time, you see? And the Earth's going to have to spin a quarter of the way until the sun, now on the upper right of our screen at the June solstice, the Cancer solstice point, is above that earthly longitude. Got it? Well, if you're there, really the sun is above the golden line on Earth, like at the Tropic of Cancer. During June solstice, the sun is directly overhead, just as it is at the equator during equinox. So from New York, Newfoundland, everywhere in Northern Hemisphere above the Tropic of Cancer, you're still looking south to see the midday sun at the reach. Got it? The Southern Hemisphere, you're still looking north. But now, everywhere in the tropics up to the Tropic of Cancer, you're also looking north. So between the tropics, right, between this zone, I could draw the Tropic of Cancer just from where this yellow line is intersecting, or is on the globe on the right. I could draw that around a circle around the globe. That would be the Tropic of Cancer on the globe. I could continue where the yellow curve on the globe is on the lower left and draw a circle perpendicular to the equator around the globe there. That's the Tropic of Capricorn. And the sun's midday light is always directly overhead, somewhere within that range. And it depends on what sign the sun's in. So one of the effects that we notice with the sun moving through the signs of the tropical zodiac, and I'm going to show this now from a northern hemisphere point of view, is that at the winter solstice, which in the northern hemisphere is around December 21st, or 0 degrees Capricorn, is the lowest altitude sun at midday for the year, right? So imagine the sun being way down here on the left of the screen at 0 Capricorn solstice point, right? Now, if you're in New York or Santa Fe where I'm sitting, or LA, which kind of seems to be at a place where that 0 Capricorn's overhead, not only are you looking south to see the sun, but you're looking south and further down than you would be when the sun's at the 0 Cancer point. I don't have the right language for that, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. And you can just gaze at this incredible image that Anna Zaharia and I've created, and just get into that. See the sun and moving through these different signs, where it is in this image here, 0 degrees, tropical Aries, and then it's going to move from the left to the right, from the west to the east, about 30 days later into Taurus, which is marked with earth green, and then Gemini there, yellow, air, and then where Gemini becomes Cancer is the June solstice. You can see the Cancer degree marked in blue for the water sign, and Leo, red, and Virgo, earth green, and then we come back to Equinox, yeah? So let me just say this too, and you can see it here. There are northern signs and there are southern signs. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo are the northern set. This is true everywhere in the world. Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces are the southern set, and you can see it here. And literally moving from Aries up to the end of Gemini, the sunbeam at midday is going to be moving from above the equator to above the Tropic of Cancer. Coming back down to the equator for Cancer, Leo, Virgo signs, tropical, and then moving south, you know, Libra, 0 Libra, Equinox, again, the sun at midday, no shadow at the equator where the sun's culminating directly overhead. But then Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius falling south on the globe to the Tropic of Capricorn. So folks at the Tropic of Capricorn, 23.5 degrees south latitude on Earth, during December solstice, will have the sun directly overhead. And then, like a goat, it climbs back up Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, until we find our way to today, the March equinox, 0 Aries, where the light at midday again is above the equator. It's on the celestial equator. It's where the circles of matter and the circles of spirit embrace, in my terms, okay? Ecliptic plane, celestial equator, the planes of year and day connect at the equinox points. Astronomy, the very real, physical, tangible, recognizable astronomy, physical function, nature of our tropical zodiac. Don't let them say it's only a symbolic language. It used to be real and now we're, no, it is real in all times. And the beautiful thing about the tropical zodiac is that it will always align to the directions. So one of our experiences is the ascent of the midday sun from its lowest height at winter solstice, which in the northern hemisphere, December 24th, 0 degrees Capricorn, to its middle height, 0 Aries. And that's true everywhere in the world. The equinox is the middle height of your local place's midday sun. And then in the northern hemisphere, peaking out at the end of Gemini, the beginning of Cancer, summer solstice, June 21st, right? Back down to the middle height, Libra. Now this, again, this is a northern hemisphere image of midday altitude that we're looking at. Altitude. If I wanted to make this southern hemisphere, first of all, we would be looking in the northern sky. The sun reaches in the northern sky for the southern hemisphere. And Capricorn would be at the top and Cancer would be at the bottom, yeah? Aries and Libra still at the middle place. And this is why I love looking at the tropical zodiac from the point of view of azimuth. Altitude is a vertical measure, angular measure, where the horizon is 0 and the zenith is 90. Azimuth is a horizontal measure. And I'll just tell you the convention is that north is 0 degrees, and therefore also 360 degrees, which becomes 0, for it's a circle, not a line. East, due east is 90 degrees, south 180, west 270, north 360, which is 0, east 90. Got it? So there are only 2 signs of the tropical zodiac that rise due east and set due west. Only 2 points of the tropical zodiac. And when the sun finds its way there, so too does the sun rise due east, set due west, and that's called equinox. So 0 Aries or 0 Libra. But I will say that's also 29, 59, 59 Pisces becoming 0 Aries, and 29, 59, 59 Virgo becoming Libra. So the equinox points, both at the rise due east and the rest due west, are fully elemental in this regard. Can you see that? And another time we'll look at azimuth, and we'll look at how from due east, 0 Aries at March equinox, Aries, Taurus, Gemini takes us towards the north till we get to the summer solstice rise. Furthest north of east, the June solstice rise, furthest north of east. Because this is global. I can say summer solstice for the northern hemisphere, but it's winter solstice for the southern hemisphere, and it's the same gig. It's north. 0 Cancer is the furthest north point of the tropical zodiac everywhere in the world. This is why I love this idea of the directions at the root, the proofs of the equations we use. They are the source of the tropical zodiac. Because whether you're in Melbourne, Australia, or New York, New York, 0 Cancer is rising furthest north of east and setting furthest north of west. The difference is that in New York, where the sun culminates in the south, to get from north of east to north of west, it's got to take a really high climb. In Melbourne, Australia, southern hemisphere, where the sun culminates in the north, north of east takes a very low climb to set north of west. So we'll get further into azimuth another time, or you can take my class, which will be ready as a video course in the end of April when Mercury finds his highest height in our morning sky. And certainly will be ready in May, Sacred Astronomy for Astrologers. Some of you took it live. It's being recreated for World Wide Web remote class. Anyway, we'll talk about azimuth. It's a very key function. If you learn to see the signs on the horizons and the altitude of the signs in the midday sky, you will connect to the proofs of the equations we use. You can do that by connecting to the glyphs as well. The ram's horns, Aries, and the scales, Libra, right? Maybe they're a little something more. We're looking east from the equator. And I don't care what day it is. It looks like this is January 12th, 2018, probably when I created this video. It doesn't matter. This is Orion's belt, which in our day and age rises due east on the celestial equator, which is always through the east and the west. Look at the Aries glyph. And let me pause this for a second and rewind this a little bit, actually. And just see, even before I bring it in, and this is true everywhere in the world, but it's especially noticeable at the equator, stars that rise south of east are heading to the south, and stars that rise north of east are heading to the north and doing this. Do you see that shape? I mean, the sky works the Aries glyph, the fountain of youth. The east is always new, and it spreads out like this. What if I take the ground away? Do you see this? Pisces glyph, with the horizon shown there in the glyph that we use. I'm going to bring the ground back in, and we'll take a trip around the world a little bit. I'm going to 37 north latitude, San Francisco, Athens, Greece, and I have to tilt the glyph 37 degrees towards the south. Look at that compared to the fish constellation, the two tied together, which in our time rises east. We are in the age of Pisces at the end of it. Going down to 35 degrees south latitude, that's like Melbourne, Australia, I believe. Tilting at 35 degrees towards the north, because everything in the southern hemisphere culminates in the north. Do you see how the glyph maps the movement of the heavens, the daily movement of the heavens, primary movement? There's like 14 degrees south and back at the equator. All right, take the ground away, dig the Pisces glyph. This is the circle of spirit, which is not fixed to the direction due east, but rather like a snake, or I'd prefer to say like a rudder, because this is an old name for the ascendant, Equinox, moves north and south of east, just like the sun does every year, the moon does every month. The signs do every day. The signs live in spaces on the horizon. The celestial equator, always east-west, and at the equator where we're looking from, also overhead. And in the south, the heavens move in a clockwise fashion, like our charts do. Where in the north, so from the northern hemisphere's point of view, we get this clockwise motion, east to west, culminating in the south. In the southern hemisphere, where we have to look north to the reach, everything moves in a different direction. And I would actually politic for ascendant on the right in southern hemisphere charts for this natural reason, but it goes either way between the tropics, so we need to have a convention. And the convention that we use is northern hemisphere because this is where this was designed. But it's nice to know, connect to nature, how the sky moves. In the northern hemisphere, I can take a chart of the moment. I can sit outside. I can look south with my chart in front of my face and see, oh yeah, there's Mars. There's Jupiter. There's Saturn. Wow, it's like, you know, in the northern hemisphere, I kind of flip it around, look through the back of the page, looking north, and that's more than enough for that today. So, I mean, look at these glyphs. The only two glyphs of the tropical zodiac that have horizontal lines that could represent horizons. Sure, we draw Gemini like this, but Gemini initially was just the two vertical lines. I have not yet sourced when these glyphs came to us, but I will show you this in nature, the Pisces glyph. Yeah. And here with some of these beautiful rays of the sun. Do you know that one of the esoteric images of the sun is the clamshell? Can you see why? Whether at sunrise or sunset, we can get those clamshell images. 12th house, which Pisces some associate with hidden things. Why? Mountains and hills and trees. The sun has to climb above the horizon typically. The stars have to climb above mountains and things before we can see them. 7th house, we could say the same thing unless we have a perfect view of the ocean here, of the sun setting, or some perfect horizon. But see, for the 7th house, we can see where it's coming from. We can see the sun, the moon, the stars in the 8th house. We can project to where they're going to set. Where do we best project? In relationships, 7th house. Also relationship, because this is the place where the heavens are falling because the earth is rising and the marriage of heaven and earth is always conducted. And we can project and see it there. Where in the 12th house, it's also happening because the earth is falling, the heavens are rising in the eastern horizon, but we often can't see it. And where are they coming from? You know, rising from out of nowhere below ground. Suddenly they're here. It's also the marriage of heaven and earth, and it's maybe more on a spiritual sense. 12th house versus 7th house, yeah? So you who speak astrology know where I'm coming from. The tropical astrology and its energetic essences are the poetic breath of nature. And you can see here in the Libra glyph, sure, the scales of balance, and I could tell you all sorts of things about them, but see the sun setting perfectly into the horizon, especially on Equinox Day, Libra, at the equator, where the sun rises due east, culminates directly overhead, and then sets on a line into the western horizon, due west. All right. The rise, the reach, and the rest. Then the roots, yeah? The northern hemisphere roots, north, rise, east-ish, reach, south, rest, west-ish. Get down with the rise, the reach, the rest, and the root. And then southern hemisphere, rising in the east, ish, reaching in the north, resting in the west ish, and rooting in the south. So for the northern hemisphere, we're picking up the sun and we're moving clockwise. In the southern hemisphere, picking up the sun and moving anti-clockwise, okay? But all of us can do these postures of the rise and the reach and the rest and the root. I love bringing these earth astrology yogas to astrologers to help not only reconnect the very living astronomy of our tropical zodiac, this beautiful natural mechanism, but also to embody this knowledge, not just to contemplate or intellectualize it, to bring it into our earth mind, the body mind. Okay? So spin in circles with the light, as I mentioned before, orbit the lamp in the middle of the room with symbols for the signs around the way, rotate and revolve, primary and secondary, and do the rise and the reach and the rest and the roots article. I'll link in the comments here and add, I think, to the description. There's a YouTube video you can see where I'm speaking about the directions a little bit in their energies. And not just the 4, but the 7, because there's also the above and the below and the middle point, which is the 7th or the 1st, where it's where they all emanate. That heart of the human is a symbol and a representative and a beating harmonic of the heart of our planet Gaia, which is the place from which we measure astrology. The earth glyph, the cross of matter, inside the circle of spirit, the cross of matter from the surface is the meridian and the horizon. The circle of spirit is not the celestial equator, that's the circle of matter, the primary motion. The circle of spirit is the dance of the sun, which is the ecliptic plane or the zodiac. And that's why the circle here, the circumference, and this is true also for our chart wheels, is the zodiac, is the ecliptic. And again, we're at this time where only twice a year, the sun finds its place where always the celestial equator and the ecliptic plane, primary and secondary, matter and spirit embrace. And where matter and spirit embrace, equal shadow and light. Does this not help tune us into what we are here to do in the monkey suit? Finally, this image here, and I think I want to do one more thing. Great. Imagine that last bit didn't happen. This image here. So we see the rise, the reach, the rest, and the root, but now with the correlation of the yin and the yang. You can see the houses drawn in here. And if you know which house your sun is in, like I have the sun in the 6th, right? If you know these at the rise on the left, that's the 12th house, okay? If we move clockwise from there, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. 7 is above the western horizon, the DS, the rest. And then we go 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Why am I counting backwards? Why would the sun rise in the 12th, not the 1st? Well, you are your ascendant. That's the moment of your descent into matter. Yeah? So the stars of the 12th house, the degrees of the 12th house, if you have planets in your 12th house, they are the last ones that are going to reach and rest and root and rise to get to you. If you have planets in the 1st house, and regardless the degrees of the zodiac, the ecliptic plane, the stars in the 1st house, they are going to be the first to rise to greet the ascendant after you rose, then the 2nd house, then the 3rd house, right? According to the primary motion. All right, so picture which house your sun lives in. Mine is the 6th, just on the right, below the horizon. And what I'm showing here is there's still a little light. The sun sets, but we still have dusk, right? Over on the left, imagine the sun in the 1st house, or even the 2nd. depending on season. Dawn, the birds begin to sing even before the sun peaks over the horizon. Yeah. So this map will help you understand that the day's energy, rise, reach, rest, and root, have the entire cycle of yin and yang primary motion, as does the secondary motion of the year, where the rise is like spring, the reach like summer, the rest like autumn, and the root like winter. So we can compare the primary day, the secondary year, and relate these two, which in astrology we do in the wonderful productive technique called secondary progressions, where we're comparing the secondary year to the primary day. And we say, if you're 42 years old, look at something that went down when you were 42 days old, because then it happened, the things that happen in spirit that are now ready to come into matter. You can also look at the arrows here, which we've extended a little bit, to see that not only is the ascendant rising, but really the entire fourth quadrant, which is the 12th, 11th, 10th houses, are reaching. They've already risen and they're on their way to the reach, where the 7th, 8th, 9th houses are resting. They're on the way to set. And that's called the third quadrant, right? The second quadrant, the 4th, 5th, and 6th houses, really maybe I should say the 6th, 5th, and 4th, they have rested and they're on their way to root. And then the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st have already rooted, and now they're on their way to rise. You see that? So dig where your planets are in your nativity. Are they reaching or resting or rooting or rising? And what does that mean energetically? It's the poetic breath of nature. This is a very real thing. And this, so some final edits so we could end with this beautiful image. And thank you, dear Anna Zaharia. I hope that you'll see this logo here at the bottom of the screen often, because I really hope to bring a lot of these astronomical, images that we astrologers should know, and not squeeze the astrology. The astronomy images have released a lot of things. Like the astronomers actually, if I asked, hey, where is Sirius right now? They would say, oh, it's 13 Cancer and 25 degrees south latitude, or hey, where's Mars in the sky right now? Mars, he's 2 degrees Capricorn, and he's got a bit of northern latitude. Is that true, or he's southern right now? Anyway, I don't have to say about right now. You understand what I'm saying? They measured, and they literally used these words like Capricorn. And they weren't talking about the constellations, by the way. They were talking about this, the astronomy of the tropical zodiac, and this was not long ago. They've since, in their divorce from astrology and the spiritual, have chosen, rather than to measure from the circle of spirit, the ecliptic plane, as we do in astrology, to measure from the circle of matter, the celestial equator. So now the astronomers will describe the location of celestial happenings by right ascension and declination. And that's the position in respect to the celestial equator, spin, circle of matter, not the ecliptic year circle of spirit. Is it any wonder that the materialist science would choose to measure from the circle of matter? No, and it's okay. But the planets play, as the sun does, at the ecliptic plane, the circle of spirit. The difference with the planets is the sun can never leave the circle of spirit. That's how it's defined, the ecliptic, because it's Earth's plane of orbit. It's the sun's plane as we witness it from Earth, where all the planets have their own gig. But for the most part, they're very close to the circle of spirit, not to the celestial equator. So we, astrologers who are tracking the planets through the signs, and we're tracking many things, including all of the fixed stars and nodes, and it goes on and on and on, it's endless. But for those of us who are tracking the planets through the signs, it really seems to me that longitude, we just call that tropical degree, and it's what it seems we're most interested in, but also latitude, which is measurement from the ecliptic plane, should really command our attention, as much at least as declination, which fortunately a lot of astrologers are using these days, distance from the celestial equator. But in declination, you can only be out of bounds around the 0 Cancer and the 0 Capricorn points. You might know that, you might not know why. If you do and don't respectively gaze at this image, think about what I was saying about where the sun laser is at midday at the time of 0 Cancer and 0 Capricorn. Understand that the signs kind of on Earth only project between the tropics of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn. So out of bounds would be a planet whose laser is pointing either above, north of the Tropic of Cancer or south of the Tropic of Capricorn. You might have no idea what I'm talking about at this point. But when we speak about the mysteries, I hope that I can do so in a way that those who are new to the starry study can engage with, and those who have been old hat can also have new windows of wonder opened. May this have confirmed what you have always known. Open those wonderful windows, and in true Gemini fashion, brought more questions than answers. If you feel like you would like to give back for what you have received here, you will find a donate button at my website, morethan.astrology.com. You will also find a services page. We could do a consultation. I love astrology and signs and planets. I also love astronomy and helping connect people to what they're rising and reaching and resting and rooting stars are, the stories. I'm a storyteller of the constellations where the planets lived at the time of your first breath. And on and on and on, looking at, well, you were born in Massachusetts, but what if you were born in India? What's happening in the heavens in that same moment, yeah? So I'll say this last thing. Above, if we all point our hands directly above right now, we're in different places. We're probably in different times too. We're pointing to a different star. And I'm pointing to a different star than I am right now than I was when I began this rap, because the Earth is spinning. So the above is the particular, yeah? Just like the surface of the Earth is particular. In that example, Massachusetts and India have very different cultures, yeah? But we measure astrology from the center of Earth. Draw a line through your spine, through the feet, and meet at the heart of Gaia. That is the place where we are all connected. The center is the whole, and that is the signs. The surface is the particular, and that is the houses. And the marriage of the two bring us into the middle, as above, so below. All right, morethan.astrology.com. You will find a donate button, a services page. I also do consultations. There will be Sacred Astronomy for Astrologers, the video course coming soon to a theater called You. And there's also an events link, which will show you where I'm out and about rapping, although I got to say I haven't put on next week's event. I will be speaking at the NORWAC convention in Seattle, Washington, where I live. My talk is Sunday, March 25th, called Joy in Saros, a title I've used before, but the talk is very different than the one you might find online, where I am revealing some of the crazy things I've been finding in my almost obsessive research of eclipses and eclipse cycles. So speaking of shadow and light, I hope to see you there. And speaking of shadow and light, let's all enjoy and set intentions of the year ahead at this time of equal day and night. Everywhere in the world, a time of balance that brings us all together in these energies. Love and planets, friends. This is your friendly astronaut, Gemini Brett, signing off. I will see you in space.